You are born in a long house, and the first thing you learn is that smoke and cold are older than comfort. Survival here already counts as an achievement, and winter removes the weak without apology. You are a free man, which mostly means you work while someone richer pretends the world is naturally arranged this way. Then comes the rumor that changes everything. In the West, gold sits in churches almost unguarded. Easy wealth is the most dangerous story ever told to a poor man, and you buy into it completely. Your inventory is practical, not theatrical, because horns belong on cattle, not on anything expected to survive a fight. The axe builds your house, splits your firewood, and if necessary, opens a Saxon skull with the same efficiency. The longship is the real miracle. Fast, shallow, flexible, and centuries ahead of the people you plan to rob. When the wind dies, you become the engine, and the engine hurts. Nobody cries at departure, because in your world, grief is private and profit is the only acceptable welcome home. The sail fills, the fjord disappears, and the horizon becomes a promise made by people who will not be rowing. This is not romance. By the third day, you are sleeping in a mixture of seawater and your own stomach. One mistake from the steersman does not mean delay, it means you become fish food with an expensive boat. Then the fog lifts, and England appears like a rich man who forgot to lock the door. The water is cold enough to stop your breath, and if you misstep, your own armor drags you under a meter from glory. The monks do not run, they pray, which is strange to you because prayer looks very fragile next to an axe. The church doors are strong, but your axes are stronger, and theology does not improve timber. Inside, the miracle is not God, it is how much gold people are willing to leave in one place. Then, you meet the berserker myth in real life and discover he is less holy warrior than dangerous lunatic with terrible impulse control. Before the world calls you legendary, it first sees you for what you really are, a fast-moving disaster with good timing. Battle is a crowded crush of sweat and fear, where everyone tries not to fall first. You win by opening a gap and hitting the man behind it before he can react. A scratch can kill. Dirt on a spear point is often more lethal than courage. The fire is a message to everyone nearby. Run, hide, or pay. Gold is good, but living people sell better. Robbery becomes slavery. The book is just a portable chunk of wealth wrapped in unnecessary paper. Now, greed fights physics. Too much treasure sinks as easily as too little skill. The kings are too slow, and for now, speed remains your best armor. At sea, wounds are sewn with sinew. Medicine here is mostly pain. You return like a god, but the raid ends with others taking the biggest share. You come home looking like a god, which lasts exactly until the roof leaks and the animals need feeding. You do not count wealth here, you weigh it, because silver speaks more honestly in pieces than in promises. The economy runs on slavery, and now you are the proud owner of other people's exhausted lives. When the sea is frozen out of reach, you fight with a board and carved pieces instead of axes. A free man is expected to speak first and kill second, which is civilized by your standards and terrifying by everyone else's. If words fail, the law gives you a smaller battlefield and lets honor try again with steel. The gods require blood, and your people are practical enough not to ask whether they might prefer something less messy. Your destiny is already woven, so fear becomes less useful than posture. England is good for plunder, but the East promises something better. Trade, silver, and cities bigger than imagination. You were sailors yesterday. Now you are beasts of burden hauling a ship toward a different world. The rivers do not care that you came by sea. If you want the East, earn it with your spine. Out here, your ship turns from predator into target, and the horse archers know it immediately. On the water, you are just a target. You are moving merchandise now. Human beings sell well. A quiet fact merchants say quietly and everyone obeys. Then you see Constantinople, and suddenly your whole country feels like a village made of splinters. This is not just a city, it is proof that the world is much larger than you were told. The emperor pays well, and for the first time in your life, your violence comes with a proper salary. You came as a raider and ended as an elite guard. Gold shines harder when someone else already organized it. No longer robbing kingdoms, you guard one that dresses power in marble and silk. The Greeks possess magic. Fire that burns on water and turns fleets into sermons on humility. If service bores you, leave your name on eternity. Vandalism is a form of immortality. From chewing rock-hard fish to eating like a man who could buy villages for sport. Back home, even your smile becomes a weapon once you carve fear directly into your own teeth. You return rich enough to buy fields, status, and a new version of yourself. But the story continues. The West still looks less like a market and more like unfinished business. This time, you are not coming to raid and vanish, you are coming to stay. The men leading this invasion understand something important. Conquest is just organized theft with better planning. The strikes end. The wolves are coming ashore to claim the whole field. Now the West stops looking like a marketplace and starts looking like unfinished business. This time, you're not here to hit a monastery and vanish. You're here to take the land and keep it. Ivar is no helpless cripple. He is the kind of strategist who makes swords look secondary. Ragnar's death is not forgotten, and in your world, revenge is not emotion, it is policy. Whether every detail is true barely matters. Cruelty itself is the language your enemies are meant to remember. You take York and turn it from a target into a machine that makes money. Sometimes the easiest conquest is simply teaching frightened kings to pay you for leaving. But when they stop paying, the old truth returns. Walls, mud, and plague are often deadlier than swords. Then Alfred shows up and reminds you that even wolves can be trapped if someone understands the terrain better. To survive, your king takes baptism, because when the sword fails, pragmatism suddenly starts sounding holy. Out of blood, bargaining, and exhaustion comes the Danelaw, where half of England becomes yours on paper as well as in memory. Once again, the raider becomes a farmer, because conquest eventually needs fences more than axes. The old story said war was a man's business until the grave in Burka quietly embarrassed them. It turns out the North had more room for violent women than later romantics were comfortable admitting. Norway grows too tight, and freedom once again starts looking like a boat pointed at empty maps. Iceland offers what every difficult man claims to want: no king, no taxes, and a landscape trying to kill him honestly. Here, even chaos gets organized, because survival still needs rules, even among people allergic to obedience. Calling an ice block green is not optimism. It is medieval real estate fraud with excellent sales instincts. Once people survive Iceland, they immediately decide the next irrational plan must also be possible. The horizon keeps moving, and you are exactly the sort of fool who takes that personally. You reach America centuries too early and learn finding a place is easier than keeping it. At first, trade might work, usually the prelude to something more educational and violent. Giving milk to people who can't digest it is a surprisingly efficient way to ruin diplomacy. The problem isn't bravery, it's math. There are too many of them and too few of you. So America remains unconquered. History briefly visited and then had to run for its life. Back north, the old gods aren't safe in public, but men keep them hidden just in case. In 1066, Hardrada sails for England as if history still owes him one more victory. The last great Viking scene is magnificent for a minute, then stupid in a fatal way. Heroism ends with trickery and blood, a very human throat full of an arrow. They came with 300 ships and left with 24. The Viking Age finally bleeds into legend. Back home, the world is changing, and men now keep Thor under their shirts while pretending Christ has fully moved in. The smith does not care which god wins as long as both sides keep paying. Harold does not baptize Denmark out of sudden holiness. He does it because kings enjoy foreign allies more than theological consistency. Once the king centralizes power, the freedom of the ordinary Viking starts dying quietly in tax form. Yesterday's raider becomes tomorrow's noble as soon as conquest finds paperwork. Within a few generations, your descendants stop sounding like you and start ruling other people in better tailored clothes. The English are no longer soft targets, they have learned. And now every victory costs much more blood. Once kings learn to pay you to go away, piracy becomes one of the most profitable tax systems in history. Eventually, they even pay you to protect them from men exactly like you, which is either genius or total collapse. By now, being a Viking is less a tribe than a business model with better ships. Then Canute does what earlier raiders only dreamed about. He stops stealing kingdoms and simply owns one. Once a Viking becomes king, looting slowly turns into governance, which is less exciting and much more profitable. Even an emperor cannot order the ocean to stop, and that may be the first honest lesson power ever teaches. The ships grow larger, because now sea power belongs to kings, not to loose bands of ambitious wolves. Naval war stops being a fast strike and becomes slaughter on a floating platform too crowded to escape. The age of free maritime warlords is dying, and the state is doing the killing. You are no longer a farmer with an axe. Now you are a professional who dies for a king's payroll. Even death changes, fewer flaming ship funerals, more roadside stones and official memory. The strangest thing about the old gods is that when they lose, they do not explode. They just quietly stop being obeyed. You still look fierce, but by now your ferocity belongs to someone else's kingdom. Then comes 1066, when one dead king turns all of England into an invitation. Hardrada sails as if 3 centuries of Viking history still owe him one last victory. For a moment it almost works, and that is what makes the ending hurt properly. But the old instinct fails. The enemy marches faster than the story says he should. One berserk hero can delay history for a minute, but not redirect it. Even the last great stand ends with a clever, ugly trick. Harold dies not as a myth, but as a man choking on blood in the mud. They came with 300 ships and left with 24, a numerical obituary. The Norse win through the Normans, descendants with better administration and worse accents. The Viking Age dies, but lives on in our language, our cities, and the fact that every Thursday still belongs to Thor. The Viking Age dies, but you survive in bloodlines, borrowed words, and cities that forgot who first frightened them properly. You do not just leave bones behind, you leave language, a quieter kind of conquest that is much harder to reverse. The docks you once treated like temporary footholds slowly become permanent cities with very long memories. Women in your world often hold more power than later Europe likes to admit, holding keys to land and legacy. Marriage here is no prison. A woman can leave, keep her property, and let you discover consequences like an adult. Even life has a price tag. Your society is brutal enough to admit what most states hide under ceremony. In the end, your immortality looks like descendants who still carry your fire and your damage forward. People remember the raiding because it is loud. But the bigger achievement is that you helped stitch half the known world into one brutal trading web. Plunder is exciting, but trade is where real wealth starts pretending it is civilized. The same people who love axes also invent a parliament, because apparently chaos gets boring if nobody organizes it. Then, the sagas are written down long after the blood dried, which is when history starts improving the dialogue and reducing the smell. Some colonies do not die in battle. They just starve slowly while pretending next season will be kinder. In the end, even the proud can become practical enough to eat what once slept at their feet. Your ships are the real miracle, genius hidden inside simple carpentry that made oceans suddenly negotiable. And yes, the horns are nonsense invented centuries later by people who confused theater with archaeology. The truth is less glamorous than the myth, but also much harder to kill. Old age is no honor here. It's an argument with fate over bed-death failure. Some men seek a violent exit, terrified of coughing themselves into oblivion on straw. Most don't get Valhalla. They get a mattress, a fever, and an ordinary death. Even the afterlife has class divisions. Paradise for the dramatic, damp boredom for hell. Runes aren't magic. They're just practical notes from people who wanted their comb back. Memory is for sale. Pay the poet to be immortal or become a joke. Your medicine is crude but efficient at telling you when to start digging graves. Centuries later, your remains look less like a hero and more like sea-chewed labor. History turns you into a celebrity because modern people prefer their savagery filtered. You survive as a myth, but only because once you were real enough to terrify. The Viking Age ends with arithmetic. 300 ships in, 24 out. The Saxons barely celebrate before Normans return speaking French and wearing heavier mail. The North wins anyway, it just changes language, tailoring, and public relations. You dissolve into other bloodlines until they call your face their own. You survive in language, a quieter and much harder kind of conquest to reverse. Trading posts and river camps become cities that outlive your gods. The raiding was loud, but you stitched the world into one violent marketplace. Gold is exciting, but trade is what quietly pays for grandchildren. History often remembers raiders by what they accidentally leave behind. The wolf has not vanished. It has simply learned new ways to wear a human face. Your world is brutal. Women here hold more legal power than later Europe would admit. Marriage is not a cage if a woman can walk out and take her property with her. Even justice is brutally honest. A life has a value, and everyone knows the number. Exile is worse than death. Once the law stops seeing you, others start seeing your shoes. The same people who love axes also invent a parliament, because chaos eventually gets tired of improvising. Not every Viking story ends in battle. Some just freeze while waiting for ships that never come. In the end, hunger defeats pride with less poetry than anyone would like. Your greatest weapon may not be the axe, but the ship that made oceans negotiable. And yes, the horns are nonsense, invented by people who mistook theater for archaeology. The real Viking world mixed law and engineering without ever feeling the need to simplify itself. If you live long enough, the great warrior becomes an old man with stories and joints that predict the weather. Some men seek a violent end, terrified of dying quietly in bed like everyone else. Most don't reach Valhalla. They find a mattress, a fever, and the quiet of a normal death. Even the afterlife has classes: paradise for heroes, boredom for everyone else. Your medicine is crude but very efficient at explaining when to stop making plans. Centuries later, your remains look less like a hero and more like a worn-out laborer. History makes you a celebrity. We prefer our savagery filtered and clean. You still haunt the week itself because every Thursday quietly keeps Thor on the payroll. Were you a wolf, a merchant, or just a human bold enough to row toward the unknown? The Viking survives as a legacy, and legacies are cleaner than the hands that built them.